I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Deepak Chopra, the world-renowned champion of integrative medicine, who's been called one of the top 100 heroes and icons of the century by Time magazine. Dr. Chopra is the author of over 91 books in 43 languages, including many fiction and nonfiction New York Times bestsellers. Today, we're discussing the themes in his book, You Are the Universe, Discovering Your Cosmic Self and Why It Matters, which explores the relationships between physics, consciousness, and the universe that we live in. So Deepak, welcome. Today we are talking about You Are the Universe, and as you are the author of nearly 100 books on philosophy and personal transformation, I wanted to start out by asking, what inspired you to work on this book in particular?
So what inspired me was the following. I had gone to a Caltech debate with Sam Harris and Michael Shermer, who at that time were promoting themselves as militant atheists. Now, of course, atheism has many versions, but this was called militant atheism, inspired by Richard Dawkins, who's the apostle of militant atheism. And I would also say the apostle of scientism, but that's another story. And during the debate, there was a break. And during the break, the person who was monitoring the debate, it was actually on one of the networks, okay, ABC, I believe. The person who was monitoring the debate, he identified a person in the audience, and the person in the audience announced themselves as Leonard Mlodinow, a co-author with Stephen Hawking on several books, including a briefer history of time, and there was another book called something. But Leonard was at that time on the faculty of Caltech, and he was well known because his association with Stephen Hawking. And so he got up and he said in the break, I'm a physicist, I work with Stephen Hawking, and what you're saying is nonsense. And that got picked up by the media. It's still there online, millions of people watching it. I was the subject of ridicule a little bit because after all, I was being, called by a famous co-author of Stephen Hawking, who was also teaching at Caltech. So it got a lot of attention, and I then wrote to Leonard and I said, Leonard, you know physics, I know consciousness, and I can guarantee you that you don't know consciousness. So if you come to New York and we spend a little time together, maybe walk in Central Park, you teach me physics and I'll teach you consciousness. Okay, bottom line, Leonard and I became very good friends, although we totally disagreed. He's a total physicalist. He thinks that matter is the fundamental reality of the universe. Matter is the ontological primitive. I said, no, consciousness is. The debate was very healthy. We became very good friends. And actually, we ended up writing a book together called War of the World Views. Now, before I wrote the book with him, Richard, this is just in hindsight to see how small scientists can be. Richard Dawkins, Oxford professor, all of that. He called Stephen Hawking's daughter, and he said, your daughter, no, he told Stephen Hawking's daughter that your co-author is working with a fraud and he should not do this book. And Stephen Hawking's daughter called Leonard and said, this is what I heard, you're working with a fraud. And he said, listen, I disagree with him, but he's not a fraud. And we have become good friends. So the book actually hit the New York Times bestseller list. And Leonard and I went on a tour together every night, debating in different venues. And, Leonard had, from a scientific perspective, if you believe matter is the fundamental reality, then all these theories, Big Bang, general relativity, special relativity, quantum mechanics are very relevant and as creating models. But I felt internally that I did not get to say what I really wanted to say. in that book, because constantly trying to prove the other person wrong, I couldn't express what I really wanted to say without somebody debating me. So then I found Menas Kafatos, who also was a physicist originally from MIT. And Menas understands consciousness as good as anyone I know. And so I said, Menas, just make sure that the physics is right, and I will try and make it as popular as possible. So we did You Are the Universe together. And again, it was a huge bestseller, and I'm grateful. But that was the genesis of the book.
Yeah. And so I had done some research on Dr. Menas Kafatos, and it looks like he has done a lot of lecturing on intersectional topics in science, spirituality, and religion on his own. And then he's also a physicist, right? So it seems like he's a really good partner for this. How did you find him for this? And what was that moment where you knew, this is the person to work with on it?
Menas and I met at several conferences, Science of Consciousness, and there's another one called Science and Non-Duality. I really felt that he understood these worlds, both these worlds, the physical and the so-called metaphysical, very well. And we, again, became good friends. And now we're all friends,
Yeah, that makes complete sense. There we go.
I
You
have
Are
a
the Universe,
copy
the book.
Is it okay for me to put it here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, so one of the major themes in You Are the Universe is that science is reaching the limits of current models, and it requires new paradigms to overcome that. And in a recent interview with Salon, you told writer Alexandra Clinton, you described scientists as being naive realists. So I guess what I wanted to ask on that was that a reference to the mechanistic worldview of Western science that traditionally separates the observer from the observed, the inner self from the outside world?
Partly yes, but partly no. So I'll tell you, you are a scientist, so you know the current conundrums in both relativity and quantum mechanics. So let's look at relativity, general theory of relativity. Whatever you might say, and we now have all this gravitational waves being detected. But if you ask cosmologists, as I did even yesterday, I was talking to a cosmologist, two cosmologists. One is a cosmologist, the other is a quantum physicist. This is their book, Where Did the Universe Come From? Okay. And these are very famous people, okay? And they're very credentialed in their field. But if you ask them, is there a cause that can be ascribed to the Big Bang? They say, we can't identify. If you ask them what happened during the Planck epoch, 10 to the power of minus 43 seconds, when there were no laws of physics, they say we can't answer. If you ask them the fine tuning of what is called the cosmic inflation, why is it so fine tuned for mind and life and our own consciousness? How come the universe tripled every trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second and then slowed down? So we have the universe, we have no answer. How about the cosmological constant? The measured value and the theoretical value is off by something like 10 to the power of 120 or 1 to the power, but ridiculous, actually. It's almost embarrassing. Then there are other conundrums in quantum physics, even though the recipes of quantum mechanics work for creating the technology we have. If you go to Wikipedia, there are 30 different interpretations, including Copenhagen, multiverse, Bayesian, on and on, even something called time-symmetric quantum mechanics, which says the future determines the collapse of the wave function in the present moment. Okay, so I said, can you answer any of these questions? And the answer was no. There are all these loopholes, and we have almost come to the end of our modeling, but we'll figure it out sometime. So that's the first thing that I want to say about the current models. They work in creating technology, but they're totally incomplete. Okay, and there are many conundrums. Now, talking about naive realism, that's actually a scientific term. So naive realism is also called scientific realism. And it's not a condescending term. Naive realism simply means that, and it's called scientific realism, there are some premises in naive realism. Everything starts with the premise. So the first premise is that the physical world is exactly how it appears to the five human senses. And even if there were no humans observing the physical universe, it would appear like it appears to us forever, even in the absence of human observers. Now, on the face of it, that sounds, realism. But how about other species? How about an insect with 100 eyes? How about a bat that knows the world through the echo of ultrasound? How about snakes that navigate through infrared? And on and on. Every species has its own perceptual activity, which it calls its reality. Or even though they're not intellectual like you and I, but they navigate their reality through their perceptual activity, which is totally different from us. So naive realism, though, says the human perception is the only accurate perception, and that the physical world is real as perceived by human senses and would be real if no humans were there. That's one. The second is subject-object split. There's me, the scientist, the observer, and then there's the observed world. But then you ask them, where is the observer? And they'll point here, but there's no observer here. In fact, there's no observer in the body. The body itself is an observation. So the whole idea of an embodied observer, in my view, is wrong, because there's no embodied observer. The body itself is an observation in consciousness.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And, if I could interject, actually, that was my next question, because you've been quoted as saying, there's no image in my brain. There's no sound in my brain, just electrochemical information. Everything we experience is actually a modified form of consciousness. And so I guess if I could ask, are you saying that the universe then is created by our consciousness and not the other way around?
The universe is conceived, constructed, governed, and becomes what it is in our consciousness. Yes, in our human consciousness. Because if I asked you, what is this? You would say it's a book. But if a child was looking at this book, visually, this is a color. And color and shape and form are the same thing. So all that you see here is a bunch of colors. The word book is a human construct. When I say, what is this visually? It's again a color contrasted with this. Color, shape, and form are fundamental visual experiences. As soon as we give meaning to them, this becomes a hand. This becomes a book. That becomes the Milky Way galaxy. But all we are experiencing visually is color. Same thing, all we experience auditorily is sound. As soon as we give it meaning, it becomes language or poetry or music or anything that we want to express. And, if you were only speaking Swahili, then this would be noise, this communication would be noise. So once you give meaning to fundamental experiences, whether they're auditory or sensations or images, and you create thoughts out of that and emotions, because emotions are constructed of how we interpret our experiences, then you create the experience of what we call everyday reality, and you call it mind, body, and universe. But those are human constructs. In reality, we are all fictional characters in a collective dreamscape. This is what Wittgenstein said. We are asleep, we are dreaming, our life is a dream, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we're dreaming. Now, why is this important? If we know how everyday reality is constructed and that it's an illusion, then we can upgrade the illusion, because the illusion right now says climate change, war, terrorism, destruction of ecosystem, other species, on and on. We have created a world where we are sleepwalking our way to extinction. So we need to wake up as the fundamental consciousness in which the universe arises and subsides in every timeless moment, because this conversation you're having is part of the dreamscape. After we finish, it won't be there. This conversation, if I asked you what happened to your childhood, you'd say it's a dream. If I asked you what happened in your teenage years, it's a dream. But what happened to yesterday? What happened to this morning? What happens to these words by the time you hear them? They don't exist. So we're making it all up. And we made up constructs like Greenwich Mean Time. Why not Botswana Mean Time? Latitude, longitude, colonial states, empires, or money, Wall Street. These are human constructs. What I'm saying is the universe itself is a human construct.
Now, so to many, this idea that we create the universe by our consciousness may seem implausible, but it seems like this is exactly the prediction that quantum mechanics is making, with the idea that the universe doesn't exist until we observe it. So I guess, would it be accurate in some ways to say that the paradigm has already changed, and that part of your role with this book is helping educate people on the ramifications of it?
Yes, a paradigm has changed, but the interpretation that you gave for quantum mechanics is called the Copenhagen interpretation, as articulated originally by Niels Bohr and Schrödinger and Max Planck and Wolfgang Pauli. Einstein, very reluctant because he was a realist. He was actually the best example of what we call scientific realism or naive realism. So he was an uncomfortable participant in that revolution. Now, it turns out today, people are attacking that Copenhagen interpretation. They say, no, the wave function branches off in different directions, and we are living in infinite universes, which, by the way, is also the subject of current Caltech professor Sean Carroll's book, Something Deeply Hidden, where he talks about infinite universes. So it's very confusing right now where quantum mechanics is going. But even quantum mechanics is a model in human consciousness. Who created quantum mechanics? Human beings in their consciousness.
Yeah, well, this brings to mind another paradigm change as well. So you and I did an interview last year, and one of the things that truly stuck in my brain, has been in my brain this whole time, was when you described our body mind as having leaky margins. And you said that anything outside of the semi-permeable membrane of my skin, I call the world, and anything inside, I call myself. And so I guess I was wondering, could you elaborate a little bit more on this difference in boundaries between the self and the outside world?
Even the leaky margins is a concept, because if you go beyond what we experience as humans perceptually, then there's no margin whatsoever. I once edited a book with 120 quantum physicists, all disagreed about everything that you can think about. I said, give me one sentence where you all agree, only one thing. And they agreed on one thing, that fundamental reality is borderless. It doesn't have margins. And if it doesn't have margins, then every margin is either perceptual or conceptual. There's no outside, there's no inside. There's only this formless, infinite, whatever it is. Now, some call it the ground state, quantum vacuum, whatever, singularity. I call it consciousness, because without consciousness, we won't even have come up with these theories.
Interesting. So another paradigm that this book seems like it really shattered is this anthropocentric philosophy that separates humans from the rest of nature. If the experiment isn't real until it's observed, and we're part of the experiment, then this seems like it might be what you meant when you said we are the universe discovering itself. Would that be?
Yes. When we say, is consciousness an attribute of the universe, I would say every conscious being, with or without a brain, we have brains, but amoebas don't have brains, plants don't have brains, but they all navigate experience. A plant will move in the direction of sunlight, away from darkness. An amoeba will seek food, reproduce itself, avoid toxins. So there's some element of consciousness. So I would say every sentient being, including plants, amoeba, microorganisms, animals, rodents, reptiles, primates, and humans are, what should I say, are terminals where the universe is seeing itself through a particular mode of experience. And that particular mode of experience that we experience is the universe seeing itself as a human being. But the universe sees itself as everything that we call creation through conscious beings.
So not only are we the universe discovering itself, but then yet another paradigm shift that you explore in the book is the notion that our consciousness itself is connected to the rest of the universe, what's called the conscious universe model, which holds that everything in the universe possesses some level of consciousness. I think you just started to describe that. Could you elaborate a little bit more on it for me?
Yes, so that particular theory that you mentioned is frequently called panpsychism, that everything, a rock, a marble, everything is conscious. I don't believe in panpsychism theoretically because it assumes the existence of matter. I'm saying there's no such thing as matter. Matter is the interpretation of perceptual activity in consciousness. So there is only consciousness. And so and consciousness can be interpreted as rocks, as plants, as the Milky Way galaxy, as physical bodies. But everything you see is actually a modified form of consciousness. That's called non-dualism, which goes beyond panpsychism, because panpsychism still assumes that atoms and molecules and force fields exist. And I'm saying atoms and molecules and force fields and gravity are names given by human beings to modes of knowing and experience in human consciousness.
Okay. And so when you're talking about consciousness, you are not talking about the gray matter in our heads. In fact, in this book, you've challenged the view that the brain creates the mind, which is the more traditional view of the consciousness. And you cited Penrose and Hameroff's OR model, along with the challenges that are involved with defining qualia, which are the experience of consciousness. Can you offer some insights on this? How the brain comes from consciousness and not the other way around?
Yeah, if I imagine a beautiful sunset on the ocean, or a red rose, or the sound of my voice of my mother, as you know, there's no such experience in the brain. The brain shows neural correlates. So the brain itself is a model that we create as a result of interpreting visual, tactile, auditory experiences. The brain itself has no consciousness. It has neural correlates of consciousness. But even that, by the way, is a kind of a dualistic thinking. In the deeper reality, mind, brain, physical body, and physical universe are different ways of perceiving or knowing consciousness. So the brain is consciousness, the mind is consciousness, the body is consciousness, and the universe is consciousness, just experienced in different modes.
Okay, so then if the brain doesn't create the mind, then the mind has to be connected to something larger. And you've written that the answer must be what you've called a cosmic self. Can you describe the cosmic self for me?
The cosmic self is the self at the root of all experience. So it's not a person. And when we normally say self, you say, who are you? I'm Deepak Chopra. That's a model. So there's also an ego identity, which again is a hallucination. Because if I say I have a body, then which one? I started as a fertilized egg, then I was a zygote, then I was an embryo, then I was a baby, then I was a toddler, on, all the way to dusty death. So when you say I have a body, which one? Okay, that's number one. There is no such thing. It's a mirage. And the brain too is a mirage. In fact, when you're born, the brain has more connections than you need. And as soon as you start having experiences, the brain starts to get sculpted. So even though the brain is created by genes, it's sculpted by experience. And every choice we make actually sculpts the brain. Right now, you and I are having a conversation. Everybody who's listening to us, their brain is being sculpted. Prefrontal cortex is going crazy with new connections. And in order to do that, genes have to be activated. So right now, you and I are not only activating our brains, we're activating the brains of everyone who's watching us or listening to us. It's a matrix of consciousness, which appears as mind, and mind is just the embodied and relational experience, which we call thoughts and feelings and emotions. We say, where is the mind? People point here, but again, there's no mind here. The mind is not embodied. Right now, our mind is in exchange, and there is no such thing as an individual mind or an individual brain, because always in relationship to other minds and brains.
So is the search for this cosmic self, is that really what drives people to seek out religion, philosophy, and other transformative practices like meditation and yoga?
Yes, this is exactly it. If you look at religious experience, not religious philosophy or ideology or dogma or theology, because those are all human interpretations. And whoever had the experience, they tried to express it, whether it's Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad, it doesn't matter, or the sages of the Upanishads or the great yogis or the prophets of the Old Testament. They had this experience and they tried to express it, but people didn't understand it because they didn't have the experience. So what is the experience? Number one, transcendence. You find your identity beyond space and time. Number two, the emergence of Platonic values like truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity. And number three, the loss of the fear of death, because the cosmic self that you are is not subject to birth and death. It's not in the field of what we call temporality. Those are amazing experiences. Knowing yourself is beyond space and time, Platonic truth, and the loss of the fear of death. Now, that is the basis of every religion and its dogma. The problem is people don't understand it, so they start worshiping the messenger instead of understanding the message and understanding it for themselves. If somebody is pointing to the moon, you should be looking at the moon, but what do people do? They worship the finger. That's what happens. We worship Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha. They were pointing to a bigger truth. And even Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. Moses, when asked the burning bush, what's your nature? What's your nature, God? God says, I am that I am. And in the Vedanta, these great Indian philosophical systems, the phrase is aham brahmasmi, I am the universe. So I didn't coin this phrase. It's very ancient.
Now, in the final chapters of this book, You Are the Universe, you end with the exploration of the cosmic self and the quest for personal transformation, which is also where your next book, Meta-Human, begins. Would it be useful for readers to think of these as a series and follow up with Meta-Human after finishing You Are the Universe?
Yes, Meta-Human followed this book, and then the book that I have that's called Total Meditation. I have it somewhere here. Meta-Human, and then Total Meditation. It takes people in practices so they can have the experiences themselves.
Okay. Well, so before we conclude, I do want to do a shout out and thank Fawn Ventura for helping me prepare for this interview. She prays in Sanskrit, meditates in the Thai Buddhist tradition, and has read dozens of your books. You met her last year, and she remains a loyal fan of your work. So I just want to put that out there. And let me close now by asking, what comes next for you? You've explored so many incredibly transformative themes in these books. I'm wondering, where will you go from here in terms of helping shatter outdated paradigms and exploring new perspectives on the world?
Right now, people are having very interesting experiences with psychedelics. And what I'm trying to do right now is see if I can give people the psychedelic experience through immersive, transformative experiences. So I'm actually doing something for the Van Gogh museums for immersive experiences. And I'm exploring the idea of meta-human adventures in the metaverse. That's where I'm going at the moment.
Okay. Building off of the foundations in Meta-Human then, and kind of going to the next level from there. Wonderful. Well, Deepak, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. I cannot thank you enough. It is such an honor.